Is the food industry really to blame for the rising costs at the grocery store, or is something else driving the prices up? Vice President Kamala Harris thinks she has the answer, but the food industry isn't staying silent. So, what's the real story behind the so-called price gouging plan? In the wake of rising food prices, Vice President Kamala Harris has stepped into the spotlight with a bold proposal. Frustrated consumers across the nation have watched their grocery bills skyrocket, and Harris believes she has identified the root cause: price gouging by big food corporations. Her plan? To clamp down on these companies with tougher regulations and penalties designed to curb what she views as exploitative practices. Harris argues that the current system allows these corporations to inflate prices under the guise of economic challenges, all while padding their profits. According to her, it's the average American family that ends up bearing the brunt of these inflated costs, struggling to make ends meet as essential items like milk, bread, and meat become increasingly out of reach. The core of Harris's plan involves introducing stricter regulations that would require food companies to justify any significant price increases. If a company can't prove that their cost hikes are a result of external factors like increased production costs or supply chain issues, they could face severe penalties. The plan also proposes the creation of an oversight committee to monitor food prices and investigate any suspicious spikes. Harris has positioned herself as a champion for the consumer, insisting that these measures are necessary to protect working families from corporate greed. She's not alone in her stance. Many consumer advocacy groups have rallied behind her, praising the plan as a much-needed step towards fairness and transparency in the marketplace. But not everyone is on board. Critics argue that Harris's plan oversimplifies a complex issue. They point out that food prices are influenced by a myriad of factors, many of which are beyond the control of even the largest companies. These critics worry that the plan could lead to unintended consequences, such as reduced investment in food production or disruption in supply chains. The food industry's response to Kamala Harris's price gouging accusations has been swift and assertive. Major companies, from global food giants to national grocery chains, have pushed back against the narrative that they are to blame for the rising costs at the checkout. Their argument is simple: they're not the villains in the story. Industry leaders argue that the price increases are not a result of corporate greed, but are driven by external factors largely beyond their control. They point to the unprecedented challenges they've faced in recent years: disruptions in global supply chains, labor shortages, and skyrocketing transportation costs as the true culprits behind the higher prices. According to them, these pressures have forced them to pass on the increased costs to consumers, not to unfairly inflate their profits. Many in the industry emphasize the complexities involved in bringing food from farm to table. The journey of a single product can be affected by numerous factors, from the availability of raw materials to the cost of fuel. When any part of this intricate process is disrupted, it can lead to higher costs across the board. Food companies insist that they are doing their best to absorb as much of these costs as possible, but there's only so much they can bear before the financial strain is passed on to the consumer. Experts within the industry have also pointed out that the current economic climate has exacerbated these challenges, with inflation affecting nearly every sector. They argue that it's unrealistic to expect food prices to remain static. Instead of viewing these companies as villains, they suggest that we need to consider the broader economic forces at play. Despite these explanations, the food industry's defense has not quelled all concerns. Critics remain skeptical, suggesting that these companies may be using the economic pressures as a cover to boost their profits. However, the industry continues to assert that they are simply responding to the realities of the market, and that any attempt to regulate prices without addressing the root causes could lead to unintended consequences, such as shortages or reduced quality. Supply chain disruptions have been a significant factor in the recent surge of food prices, according to industry leaders. The journey of food from farms to grocery store shelves has been anything but smooth in recent years. ports clogged with cargo ships, delays in the transportation of goods, and shortages of essential materials have all contributed to the escalating costs that consumers are now facing at the checkout. These disruptions began with the COVID-19 pandemic, which exposed the vulnerabilities in global supply chains. Factories shut down, shipping routes were disrupted, and labor became scarce. Even as the world began to recover, new challenges emerged: geopolitical tensions, extreme weather events, and ongoing labor shortages, all of which compounded the already fragile supply chain. The food industry points out that these disruptions don't just affect the final product but ripple through every stage of production. For example, delays in the delivery of raw ingredients mean that manufacturers have to pay more to keep their operations running. This increase in production costs is then passed along to wholesalers and retailers, who ultimately pass it on to the consumers. Transportation has been another critical bottleneck. With fuel prices soaring and a shortage of truck drivers, the cost of moving goods across the country has risen sharply. This has had a direct impact on the price of food, as companies struggle to get their products to market on time and within budget. While some consumers might wonder why these disruptions haven't eased now that the pandemic is largely under control, industry experts explain that the supply chain is a complex and interconnected system. It doesn't just snap back to normal overnight. Recovery takes time, and even small hiccups can have outsized effects on prices. The food industry argues that these supply chain issues are the primary reason for the rising costs at the grocery store, not corporate greed or price manipulation. They insist that they are doing everything they can to manage these challenges, but there are limits to what they can absorb without passing on some of the cost to consumers. As long as these supply chain disruptions persist, it's likely that food prices will remain high, despite efforts to stabilize the market. This raises important questions about how prepared the industry and the country are to handle future crises that could further strain the delicate balance of global supply chains. The surge in food prices isn't just due to supply chain disruptions. Inflation has also played a key role. As inflation impacts the broader economy, the cost of producing, transporting, and selling food have risen, leading to higher grocery prices. Factors like monetary policies, global economic trends, and trade tariffs contribute to these inflationary pressures. The food industry argues that they are simply passing on these increased costs, not expanding their profit margins. However, critics suggest that some companies might be using inflation as an excuse to raise prices more than necessary, prompting calls for greater transparency and oversight to protect consumers. As Kamala Harris's price gouging plan gains attention, experts warn of potential unintended consequences. While the plan aims to protect consumers by curbing excessive price increases, it could inadvertently burden small and medium-sized food producers, who may struggle with stringent regulations. This could reduce competition and drive prices even higher. Additionally, the plan might disrupt fragile supply chains by discouraging companies from making necessary investments during crisis, potentially leading to shortages or lower quality products. There's also a risk of exacerbating inflation, as companies might cut costs in ways that harm innovation and product quality. Ultimately, while Harris's plan seeks to combat unfair pricing, it could create new challenges within the food industry. Policymakers must weigh these risks to avoid solving one problem only to create others. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like this video, click the next one shown on the screen. Thanks for watching.